All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the State Board of Agriculture meeting. Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. I'm Elin Miller, Chair of the Board of Agriculture, and I will officially call this meeting to order. John Boyce, Board Coordinator, will review a few housekeeping items prior to our meeting. John.
Thank you. This meeting is being recorded and transcribed. For those attending virtually, if you could ensure your microphones are muted to prevent unnecessary background noise, that'd be great. You may also get a notification that someone has muted you, and that will likely be me if your microphone does come off mute. And we also request that only board members and those actively presenting turn on their web cameras during the meeting to minimize our strain on bandwidth. If you're joining by virtually or by conference call, our pre-meeting materials are posted on ODA's website at oda.direct/boardagriculture, and I'll throw that link in the chat here shortly.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Will you please call the roll of board members for introductions? I'll begin. Elin Miller, Farmer Umpqua.
Vice Chair Eric Orem.
Eric Orem, farmer from Heppner.
Chad Allen.
Chad Allen, farmer in Tillamook.
Barbara Boyer. I don't see her online.
Excused. I think she's not well.
And Mike Dill.
Mike Dill, public member from Philomath, Oregon.
Ty Cleaver.
Ty Cleaver, farmer in Cheburg, Klamath Falls.
Miguel Lopez is excused. He'll be joining us later. Kirk Mogg.
Kirk Mogg, public member, Portland.
Ellie Norris.
Ellie Norris, farmer, Umpqua.
Josh Zielinski is also excused. Dean Stacy Simonich is also excused. And Director Lisa Sharplow-Hansen.
Lisa Sharplow-Hansen, Director of the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Roll call confirmed that we do have quorum present and can proceed with the meeting. For those joining us virtually, please use the chat box as the sign-in sheet. Enter your name and organization. Throughout the meeting, I'll only monitor this chat box for technical issues. In general, please refrain from chatting with other participants or board members. I don't see anyone joining by phone only. And then for those joining us in person today, if we can have you each state your name and organization for our attendance record. And if I could start with Lindsay, do you want to kick us off? Casey?
Casey Prentice, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Steve Rock, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Carla Nallis, Department of Agriculture.
Paul Foister, Red Nutrient and Far West Agribusiness.
And Bill Miller, my husband. All right. Yeah, let's go. Do we have some folks joining online? So do you want to call them out for me since I can't quite read the names, John?
Yeah, for online, we've got Sonny Summers with ODA, Charlotte Campbell with ODA, Adam Crawford with ODA, Tammy Denny from Oregon Cattlemen's, and then a few folks that I don't recognize, Travis Miller, and Tracy Lowe, and Bill Perry.
So could you just who you are work for? So Tracy and who else?
Bill Perry's Oregon Association of Nurseries.
Thanks, Bill.
This is Tracy. I work for the Statesman Journal.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And was I missing one? I think we got Travis.
Legislative Fiscal Office.
Okay, Travis. Okay, Legislative Fiscal Office. Okay, thank you. Great. Before we review the minutes, we do have a little bit of a change in agenda I wanted to announce earlier because we're going to be having to vacate the room. We're here at the State FFA Convention. We have to vacate the room a little early tomorrow. So we're going to move the board business till before we eat dinner tonight as a board. And so that'll be toward the end. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that the board business that was scheduled for tomorrow is going to be occurring at the very end of our program after our speaker has concluded this evening. So next on the agenda, we'll review the minutes from our December meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Ty Cleaver, for the record, I so move.
Ellie Norris, I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Let me tell you the good news. We have gotten an agreement that we don't have to say our names as board members before we speak. So I think we all know each other. I know our voices and we're recording, and so you don't have to do that anymore. But thank you for right out of the chute doing it correctly. So anyway, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes as presented. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? All right, motion carries. Okay, next agenda item, Lisa, Director's Report.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Redmond. It's good to see all of you, and I'm really excited about the next 2 days and all it has in store for all of us. So enjoy your time here, enjoy your time with the kids. It's always a rock concert with just some of the greatest kids around. So I'm going to go through just kind of happening since, let me think, we were together in December, right? So in the news, you may have seen several articles around our seed regulatory program, slow pay, no pay, with a large seed company. We ended up also finding records violations there that have ended up with a civil penalty. We have another situation with another company around slow pay, no pay that we're working through as well. And I think what we're finding there are some real challenges in terms of the economics out there in the seed world, as well as the contracts and growers getting paid on time. And so we'll continue to keep an eye to that, but it was in and out of the news quite a bit over the last couple of months. Legislative session, we'll go deep into that in our next board item. I want to say thank you to the team. It went fast and it was furious and there was a lot going on. And we played in a lot of different spaces that maybe we haven't been in and done work in before. One of those being around House Bill 4153, farm stores. We worked with a coalition around legislation to provide a permit that'll be in place that's more combining ag farm sales and agritourism, et cetera, under one permit, under what traditionally has been a multi-permit system in our land use system. I think it was a lot of really hard work, and I want to call out Lindsay Ng because she's had to do the quick course on land use and really dig in around that to help us navigate and work through it and represent us in many, many meetings. If you have the opportunity to go back and listen to any of the floor speeches around House Bill 4153, it's worth a listen. I think the House was probably one of the most impactful speeches that I heard, in which Representative Helm talked about how contentious this issue has been over time and how much work had gone into it, and really the challenges in terms of both sides having really strong feelings. And one of his comments, to sum it up, was basically the land use system needs to figure out how to bend, or there's concern about it breaking. And it really hit me hard in terms of thinking about some of the challenges that we face in Oregon with protecting farmland and having it available for production and for the next generation, along with balancing those needs for additional farm income for producers, dealing with the need for energy and solar and all of the things that are out there that we're competing for the same land base and trying to figure out how to balance. And so if you have a chance, it's worth listening to, but that was a pretty heavy lift from December through the end of session for all of us. And I think I had mentioned probably in December that we were working in that space a bit. Big accomplishment for natural resources. So Isaac, I think you should take a bow. Woo, 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 woo. Last week, the Lower Umatilla Groundwater Management Area rules were filed and finalized, and so they are in place. And so, thank you to the Rules Advisory Committee, everybody that worked on it, and there was a big contingency of staff. We were about a year from the first Rules Advisory Committee to the final filing, which I think, given how complex those rules are and impactful they are, is pretty amazing. And so I think something for all of us to be really proud of, and I am incredibly appreciative to the team for how they leaned in around it, moved it forward, and did such a great job with process and working the process with people. So huge accomplishment. Coming out of the legislative session was funding for Japanese beetle. You may remember that during the 25 legislative session, funding for the Japanese beetle monitoring and eradication was not in the agency's budget. We all knew that the markets would react. I don't know that any of us anticipated how strongly the markets would react in terms of other states having concerns about the pest pressures and the potential for Oregon losing the level of ability to move product. The nursery industry has really leaned in around this issue, working it both with the agency. We've adopted a fee increase for the nursery program to bring some staff on to help around Japanese beetle. They've worked it on the national side and ultimately worked to get about 1.8 million for the agency for funding so that we can do the survey work, which will allow us to continue. Jonathan, is it Class A? Category 1. I knew it was one, Category 1 in terms of our movement. And so that is really, really good news for the nursery industry. And we are really thankful for their work in helping us have the funding to do what we need to do to help support them. I would draw to your attention tribal engagement. Over time, ODA has had more and more efforts in terms of tribal engagement, and John has really taken this on with open arms and doing more to highlight ODA's programs and connecting in with tribal activities, including working with Sunny Summers around our rulemaking process to try and make it more accessible. And so we're really excited about that work. And when we are in Madras in June, we'll have part of the tour will be with the Warm Springs tribe. Excited about that, but this is a big step for us in terms of how much engagement is going on with ODA activities. The other thing I would mention, a lot of activity around emergency response planning. So you may remember, and it's in the board packet, an update on how we're doing with the governor's accountability measures. We continue to do well in that area. We had to do a new COOP plan. Sunny Summers worked on revising that. She's now going through the process of working with Oregon Emergency Management in terms of how we actuate that plan should we have to do that, as well as being involved in several tabletop exercises. One of the most recent ones was around a disaster with Hanford. And so, being prepared for what we would have to do as an agency in carrying out our emergency response activities, as well as supporting the ag sector. We will be bringing on a new HR director the end of this month. Our former director moved on to another agency, and so we're very excited to bring Katie on. I think she'll be a great addition. She comes to us from the Department of Corrections, so with a lot of different experience maybe than what we've had before. I think the other thing I would talk about a little bit is just generally as we go into looking at budget development for 27, 29. Yesterday was the budget kickoff meetings. And for the most part, we're all looking at flat budgets. If programs want to grow or agencies want to grow programs, basically we need to look within ourselves and take it from somewhere to push it to somewhere else. Fee increases are somewhat limited unless they're maintaining programs at current service level. So we're not going to see it for program growth. I think by all intents and purposes, as I look forward, I'm like, if we hold things together at current service level, I'll consider that a major accomplishment. That said, we've been doing a lot of work around our fund balances. And if you remember, a big portion of our agency, about 60% of it is funded with fees. And we call them other funds programs. And so they can be fees for services, they can be licenses, they can be registrations. In some of our programs, especially in the area of inspections, so the shipping point inspection program, the brand inspection program, I think our seed inspection, our certification, our organic certifications. We potentially, as we look towards the end of this biennium, are going to be in some negative cash positions without doing balancing and managing, right? And so we will be doing that, but we will be needing to look at functionally some of those fees that haven't changed for a while and increases around those. So we'll talk more about it with you as we bring our agency request budget proposals in at our next meeting in June. But we also need to be thinking about how we're funding the work that we do in our plant pest and conservation program. That program has changed over time and become quite reliant on federal funds for projects and not a whole lot of money on it for core and the core work. And I think as we've seen emerging pests and the challenges of it, I have real concerns about how we keep that program funded adequately to do the work that we need to do. So that'll be another discussion that I think we'll need to continue to engage in with all of you and with the ag industry going forward. The number of pests that continue to come to Oregon is not limited, is what I would say about it, and there's always quite a bit of work there. So we are looking at how that too is paid for. So I think we'll be having a lot of cash conversations over the next couple of months as we approach next biennium and the next biennium's budget. And I think with that, I would mention we're starting to recruit for commodity commissions. And so spread the word for people who want to get involved. There will be opportunity. We're right on the cusp. I think the Specialty Crop Grant Advisory Committee met this week, and I'll be looking at recommendations for funding specialty crop grants over the next couple of weeks. And then just continuing to work on agency realignment, ag services, and modernization in terms of how we provide services across the state. And given the cash position, it makes it a little more challenging to work through some of those things. So that's where I would stop, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
This may not be the best place for it, but we could talking about it maybe later. But there had been some recent notice that John sent to the board in regards to the Department of Energy work. And so I don't know, it's a deadline like on the 24th of March, that the response, or 27th of March or something like that. And I didn't know where we should slot that in for a discussion, maybe tonight at the business meeting, but go ahead.
I can talk about it
Okay,
just a little
thank
bit.
you.
So if you remember back in December, Department of Energy came and talked about the energy strategy. There also is a Climate Action Commission. They used to be the Global Warming Commission. They meet on a regular basis. I have a seat on that commission as the agency director, and Troy Abercrombie from our WEEDS program represents us quite a bit there because of the work that he does around working lands. During our most recent meeting, there were conversations around the next iteration of work and where there are gaps, potentially in terms of Oregon being able to meet our climate emissions reductions for 2035 and 2050. And agriculture came up as part of that conversation in terms of one of the areas that could be a gap and will be explored. We forwarded to you earlier today an article that was in the Capitol Chronicle that talked about it in terms of the potential to look at emissions from fertilizer applications, emissions from animal agriculture, et cetera. We've asked for a meeting with the staff that are working on that, and we'll be moving towards it. But there also is a public comment period where they're looking for feedback around the gaps and any information. Tomorrow, when the governor's office is here, Amy Schlusser is the governor's energy advisor, and so she may be able to speak to a little of that as well. She previously worked with the Climate Action Commission. I always say commission, sorry, I misspoke.
Okay, so I would just go ahead. Chad.
Yeah. I guess I just want to weigh in just real simplistically that I think that it's really important that we get the opportunity to weigh in on this and the negative impacts to Oregon agriculture could have on this in certain sectors. And so, hopefully we'll be given that opportunity to advise the governor's office on those impacts.
Yeah, thank you, Director Allen. And I think, too, since we had the Department of Energy speak to us at our December meeting, and none of this came up, and now it came up, and I think we learned for the first time on Friday, and we have a short amount of time just to be able to, whether or not, let's ask some questions with Amy tomorrow, and then, we've been known to write letters if it's important to write letter. I don't know if that's appropriate, but however we can assist on weighing in, but maybe we can get a little more details on that. But if you hadn't had a seat, because it just came today, it came in the email, right, from John. So if you're driving over and you hadn't seen it, take a look at it so you'll be prepared tomorrow. So that was one thing that wanted to new information. Any other questions, comments on the director's report? I just want to say again, thank you to the team. You think in a short legislative session, it's a short legislative session, but there was a tremendous amount of work that went into it. And also, as you take a look at tab 2 in our binder, again, this is where we have the overall reports from all the areas of the Department of Ag, and shows all the things that are going. And then too, taking a look at where we are on our strategy, and I really appreciate the department updating on that as far as where we are on our overall strategic plan is in our quarterly report for March. So we're keeping track of, we're doing what we said we're going to do. So I just wanted to also mention that for the record. So Okay, anything else? All right. I think you guys want to have lunch or dinner early. So, okay. All right. Next, I'll call on Jonathan. Adam, I think you're joining virtually, and Lindsay is here to give us the budget and legislative update. And again, thanks for all your efforts.
Well, say, now that you put the three of us up here, I don't know if dinner's actually going to come early. You just gave us more time to fill up.
We usually rush you, Jonathan, so.
Good evening, Chair Miller, Director Sherple Hansen, members of the board, Jonathan Sandow, Deputy Director at Department of Ag. I'll run through kind of some of the legislative updates from 26. Lindsay, I think we'll kind of put some finer points on some of the policy bills, and then we'll hand it over to Adam to kind of run through the budget, any kind of additional components to the budget. We broke down underneath tab 3, kind of just highlighting some of the policy bills that we thought were kind of relevant to bring forward to this group. Obviously, there's a lot of work that happened during the session that we're not going to discuss here, as it's it might not pertain directly to the agency or to our to the folks that we work with quite a bit. But there are a few bills that we really want to kind of bring to the attention that directly impact ODA, impact the operations. First one is around House Bill 4034. This deals a lot with our animal rescue entity program, which is run out of our state vet kind of animal health program. And I think just a quick primer on this one, this is a program that came to ODA in 2019. It was a heavily county-run program to license and work with animal shelters and rescues across the state. And what came with it in 2019 was very prescriptive statute, and in terms of record keeping and kind of the requirements that folks had to do. And as we worked through it and we kept kind of refining the program, it really was clear that there was just some statutory changes that need to happen to bring some of those requirements into rule. And as we testified to the legislature, the intent is not to change kind of to change the intent of the original bill and the status and the what we're asked to do. It's really on the how, and being able to go out and really work with rescues rather than kind of saying, well, did you get a photo of this animal within 24 hours of receiving it? Is there an address that's associated with this animal? Because a lot of times there's homeless folks that come in and there's not a physical address associated with that animal. That's a records violation underneath the current statute. And so bringing in a lot of this kind of ability to really implement the objectives of the program. So there was a heavy conversation a couple sessions ago. It was a big conversation even last session, and then this was ultimately a version of the bill that didn't advance in 25 that came back in 26 and made it across the finish line. Another bill that kind of really moves into some of the budget pieces as well, but there was a new revenue stream established by the legislature on the transit lodging tax, which is TLT, commonly known as, and that the revenue is dedicated by statute, and ODA has a few percentage points, or like decimals of percentage points of that dedicated to really two main buckets inside of ODA. One is the wolf depredation program. We'll get kind of that reoccurring funding from the TLT, and then into the Oregon Invasive Species Council and the work that council does as well. Estimated revenue, the LRO reports were about $4 million realized, expected to be realized between that tax to ODA, about $3 million by annum into the wolf fund, roughly about $1 million into the Oregon Invasive Species Council. So that is, that's not a small number of resources that's going to, go into those two programs. The next one that really impacts our agency is the 4065 around this slow pay, no pay rules, kind of what, Director Sharple-Hanson talked about a little bit. Lindsay can go into finer points. The governor's bill 4084, the Joint Permitting Council. We are part of the council, and we'll be on that, looking at kind of ways that when the expedited or fast tracking permitting system requirements are met, how we interact with those, what permits we have to have within those strategies. And then the Unified Trade Strategy is a bill to kind of have all the coordinating agencies work on updating the state's Unified Trade Strategy. Next set of bills.
Jonathan, just really quickly on the Joint Permitting Council, is there a subject area or is any permit in the state on anything?
Yeah, so it's really on the it's mostly focused kind of on the construction side of work, and then there's a monetary threshold.
Right. Okay. But construction permits.
Yeah. And
okay.
So
I wasn't sure if it was something else. Okay.
Yeah. And so when we looked at it, right, a lot of our permits, weights and measures, those types of, like, it's activity once the infrastructure is already there. The one that we really think, identified, I don't know if it'll ever reach the monetary threshold, but is really around our CAFO permits, because we're involved from the start to finish on those ones. And so, but we do have a role on the joint permit.
Okay, but $1 million threshold?
No.
It was $25 million.
It's $25 million threshold.
For like the rule.
Okay, thank you.
50, and then there's some tiers there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Kind of some other ones, and we'll kind of take them fast. But one is 1539. This one started off the session naming the department, but this one really has to do with the licensing structure that the Oregon Vet Board issues, and what's allowed within that license. And there's conversation with the livestock industry around allowing kind of the verifying of pregnancy of cattle outside of needing a veterinary license. That the final version of the bill rightfully went to the Oregon State Medical Examining Board, who does all the licensing structure. There's also a 5-year sunset provision on there, with the thought process of see how it's working, come back, and kind of have those more conversations in 5 years. Farm stores. Lisa touched on it. Lindsay can really go, take a deep dive for those who are interested. There was a change to the tax code around the farm uses and the property tax special assessment there. Blue state economy, and then within just some other the governing ones we wanted to put on there, just in case if it sparked any conversations. But obviously highlighting the Water Professionals Appreciation Week, as we interact with a lot of the water folks, and it was always a good conversation with that one. So those are really, I think, the summaries of the major policy bills that came out of 26. And so before we go any further than that, I'd say, Lindsay, if you have any more you want to add to farm stands, farm stores.
Sure. Chair Miller, Director Sharple-Hanson, Lindsay Eng for the record. So I'll just go into a little bit more about the seed bill, because I think Lisa touched on that this year was kind of a banner year, unfortunately, for slow pay, no pay, and what's going on in the grass seed industry. So we had been going through the process with DLF Incorporated, and they had a significant amount of growers that were not paid the negotiated price from 2024. This was the first time that we had kind of two very separate laws in grass seed specifically coincide, and that is price negotiations and our ability and authority to enforce that price that the director sets when we do supervised price negotiations, and the slow pay, no pay laws that govern seed payment or non-payment to a grower. Grass seed is very specific, and I think we've talked about it a little bit, but happy to answer questions, of course. But there is a May 1st deadline for all grass seed contracts where payment has to be made. And so if a grower and a dealer get to that point past May 1st and they're not paid for the seed, then they can apply to the Department of Agriculture, and we will review the contract, review all of the paperwork around the seed to ensure that it meets contract specs, and then we can issue a demand for payment to the dealer if it is a valid claim. In 2011, they added that for other seed types, but that has been a little less used, but we did use it this year. So HB 4065 was brought in an attempt to kind of clarify how the legislative intent, I think our legislature felt that they wanted to clarify what their intent was and how they wanted that to happen. And so they tried to clarify essentially like what is the process for the department to go through this in terms of the administrative law process, because as many of you know, it's quite lengthy and long. So the first thing that it did is it essentially just made more clear that the growers, if they weren't paid by the May 1st deadline and they received, the dealer received a letter from the department that they had to pay that within 30 days or we could suspend their seed dealer's license. That we believe was already there. And we've done some work with DOJ to try to move in that direction, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other thing that it did is it changed the interest amount. So in 2011, the negotiation was around a 1% simple interest that would be due to the grower for the number of months that they didn't pay, which was not a lot of a deterrent. And so that was increased to a prime plus 1% interest rate. And then it also increased fees to the grower when they request it. So currently in the law, there's two fees that are charged to the grower. One is when they file a claim so that we don't have unnecessary claims. They pay $50 and then we do the investigation and then they pay $150 if it's a valid claim so for us to go forward with the payment demand. They doubled those payments in 4065 and it passed, I think unanimously, right? It was pretty clear support, really just reaffirming the support for slow pay, no pay. We are going to do rulemaking very soon here, hopefully before the May 1st deadline, to change our rules. This did not change our trajectory too much, other than we'll be able to increase the interest rate. But I think the important thing I just wanted to point out is that we are not going to be increasing the grower fees. There's already a bit of a deterrent in just going back to the grower a second time, which is how our current administrative rules read, kind of also adds another administrative delay in the process. And so we'll be looking for another way to speed up the process and not add that to the grower. Certainly not an inexpensive spring that we had in winter with the slow pay, no pay. But I think given the public interest in this area and the number of growers that have been impacted, these increased fees in many cases would be almost as much as they owe. And so it doesn't seem like that is the right place to increase fees. So we'll continue talking about the best way forward. And that Rules Advisory Committee will be starting in the next month.
Chair Miller?
Yes,
I got a question.
Director Allen.
And you may have gone over this in the past, but I don't know if you can quickly do it or not, but can you sort of explain what the history is in terms of the grass seed industry and what created the legislation to get involved in the price no slow pay, no pay and collection part of that negotiation? Because I'm not, it just seems.
Yeah, I probably can't give a fully detailed history, but I will say that over time, the contracting of grass seed has gotten more complicated. And so we're actually in a situation where because of the intellectual property that's owned by the dealers, the growers are in an even more difficult situation. And many times, so they are contracted to grow a proprietary seed variety. They grow that proprietary seed variety, and if the dealer, if the market changes and the dealer does not pay for that, they can't sometimes sell it in the open market because they don't own the intellectual property on it. There's a lot of other variations of that, but I think that is the unique instance that makes grass seed so difficult, and where the growers don't have another option in many cases. The other thing I would say is that we've had a variety of new contract innovations over the years, and they continue to come. And so in cases when the market drops like it did the last couple of years, where we had a significant drop and we have thousands and thousands of pounds of grass seed still sitting in warehouses, there hasn't been a backstop for the growers. They don't have access to traditional crop insurance. They don't have access to some of these other kind of safety net resources. So the industry has come to the legislature to both add in requirements for all contracts and also to put in slow pay, no pay laws.
If I might.
How long ago was that? Did it first start?
Yeah, let me see if I can help with kind of a high level. So high level, ODA has a very unique role for a couple of commodities in terms of supervised price negotiations: crab, grass seed, and I believe berries. And it's very unique. The slow pay, no pay law goes back to the early 2000s when a grass seed company, ABT, went bankrupt, and it left a lot of growers holding the bag, and they had what were called, basically, I think they were called bailment contracts. So the growers didn't own the seed. This is the proprietary piece of it. They were a contract grower, and there were a lot of growers that were hurt time and space in that. As part of dealing with it, the slow pay, no pay law came into effect, hoping that we would tighten that gap so you wouldn't have as many growers hanging out for as long. And it's evolved over time with several iterations. I mean, I think Lindsay spoke to 2011, is that right? Mm-hmm. Was another iteration of it. But it really does go back to the ABT bankruptcy.
Any other questions? Yes, Director Norris.
Thank you. So blackberries, crab, and seed are the only commodities that have access to this program?
Yeah. Actually, we've never done blackberry price negotiations. They're all a little bit different in how we can determine them. Pink shrimp is also included in the seafood price negotiations. We've not done them for pink shrimp either. I'm looking at Casey. So traditionally, though, grass seed and crab have been the two industries that we have done supervised price negotiations in.
Okay. Anything else there? And did you want to highlight any other legislation?
I can chat a little bit about the farm store bill if you'd like. So just to give a little bit of background on the farm store bill, again, if you do have time, there was probably more time spent on floor speeches with that than many others in both chambers, and it's quite an interesting debate. I just wanted to kind of go over where we landed with farm stores, just to give some context. So I think one of the most important things that I want to highlight is that farm use and the ability to sell your own products, that is farm use and remains the same. So you can sell products on your farm that you grew on your farm. No permit is required. That's a farm use and continues to be. What ended up happening in this session is the original House Bill 4153 was amended to essentially include farm stores as a separate sub 1 use. Sub 1 meaning that it is a use that is compatible with EFU zones and does not need kind of the farm impacts test as we hear often. And so currently there is a permit and was prior to this session for farm stands. I believe there's like 109 of them that have been issued since 2009. Many of them that you know that have been in the public. That permit still stands and is available the same as it was prior to this legislation. But this legislation added a separate one that's called a farm store. So it's not the easiest in terms of semantics and lots of confusion added around that. But it was really important. So in the farm store permit discussion, one of the things that the agencies and the people that brought the bill were interested in was having kind of requirements prior to being able to qualify to apply for a farm store. And that was that you had to have a certain amount of farmland in active farming or have an income from farm uses, farm revenue over the previous 2 years of $10,000. That became quite a lightning rod in the legislative session, as we have a lot of farms in Oregon that do not meet that income threshold. And so I wanted to share some numbers. So 52.5% of our 40,000 farms sell less than $5,000 of revenue, farm revenue in a year. And 74% of them sell less than $25,000 in gross farm revenue. So there's a large portion of our farms that do not farm 10 acres and are not making that threshold. And I think that the legislature heard from many of them and their concerns about their ability to participate in direct marketing and agritourism. So they still have that opportunity. They had that opportunity under farm use. They have that opportunity still under farm stands. Farm stores were developed, I think, for maybe the next size up. And so I think the important pieces that was important from those operators that are currently doing farm stands that really came out of both the DLCD rulemaking as well as the legislative work group in 2025 were kind of being able to grow beyond the 25% income cap that exists for farm stands, where if you are doing agritourism activities or selling retail incidental items, that has to be limited to 25% of your farm stand income. So that can be limiting when you talk about the types of products that you're selling at your farm stand. So the farm store change did a couple of things. It did away with the income restriction. However, you must be farming a certain amount of acreage or have that income in farming. You must sell your own products. And then the size of the store is limited to a similar size as like farm processing facilities or other farm buildings at 10,000 square feet. You can sell incidental retail items inside of the farm store. Those are things like T-shirts and mugs that are branded for your product or for your farm, but those need to be limited to 25% of the square footage of the inside of the store. The thinking from county planners was that they're very familiar with square footage requirements, and it's a lot easier. They do not need to go in and be auditing records, financial records. And so that was a compromise. The other two things that I think are really big is one, farm stores would be able to serve prepared foods. This was kind of something that was murky previously, and so they are allowed to do that, including farm-to-table dinners, cafes representing the products that they're selling in their store. And they're also able to host agritourism events. They are defined in the statute for what those are considered to be. Third party renting out the farm for weddings or concerts or third party events is not allowed. So it's pretty specific in terms of what's included in there. So they're kind of two different intentions, and they represent, I think, a compromise. We saw a policy change from Oregon Farm Bureau, and they participated in it as well. So that may be of interest to you in their policy book, talking about agritourism and farm stands. I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have any.
Any questions from the group? Yes, Director Norris.
Do you have an idea of roughly how many qualifying farm stores there will be in Oregon?
No.
Okay, again, a tremendous amount of work, a very complex area, and thank you for all the work on that. Appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think
Jonathan.
before we jump to Adam for kind of budget components, one, I want to highlight like those kind of two deep dives into two of these policy bills is still yet just a snapshot and summary of the complexity of the work that goes into the full apparatus of working in the legislative session. We get the the privilege and the honor to be able to come up and talk about these and to present them. But these are not done in a vacuum. These are not done just by a few of us, right? Like this is done by the entire organization, and a coalition of folks, across, not only the enterprise, but our external partners as well. And so, I mean, the success around, some of the budget victories, that the director talked around, Japanese beetle, the wolf depredation funding, the, TLT, like, and I know we have some of, the folks from nursery and cattlemen and, other folks listening in and in your communities. And it's like, it is a lot of work from a lot of moving parts and a lot of, kind of components. And so, we go through it fast. We kind of hit very summarized things. Hopefully we, make it seem like it's a smooth, easy process. But, that, I think that kind of little bit of a deeper dive into some of those bills just shows how complex it is. And no sooner do we wrap up this session, we are looking towards the future and we are looking towards 27. And, I think for just a quick grounding, during the short sessions, agencies don't introduce bills, right? Those opportunities come in the long session. And so, while the short session was going on, while we were heavily engaged in this, all the background work inside of the agency was starting to gear now towards what does that 27, strategy and outlook look like, starting to, really kind of think through that. Our concepts, agency level, but enterprise level, right? Our concepts are, we are submitting, elements of those to the governor's office and into the bigger, consideration bucket by mid-April. And so we're moving very quickly on shifting now from this end of session. A lot of folks were working on kind of what those look like. And really our main, kind of 3 buckets that we outlined looking at it was really, what technical fixes need to be done in order to keep implementing these programs. Every 2 years, there's always something that changes, right? And so what technical fixes need to be done. Where are we at in this, part of the budget side of it, if we're running up against statutory limits on fees, where do we need to increase those statutory limits? Those take policy bills, to increase those set limits. We always, increase a cap and then we over time, kind of, implement over, or up to it. And then the third one is really looking at, looking through our strategic plan, layering on, the conversations around, the prosperity roadmap, layering on a lot of these conversations that are happening and saying, we're not, not changing, expanding, or, really, moving programs in different directions that are going to have huge impacts, but where are these areas that we can improve how we deliver services, both internally and externally, right? How can we make this easier for the folks at ODA and the folks who are engaging with whatever, program or that may be. That might be looking at how's this done on the national side, right? Are there national models that we can look at to make it more familiar? Is it kind of overriding requirements that we have to send things out via paper because electronic means are, equivalent. And so it's going through a lot of those kind of considerations to look at that. And so as we bring that full stack, in the June meeting, like that, those are really going to be those flavors of the context of policy bills that we're going to be looking at crafting and putting forward. And so, session ends and now we start, synthesizing, we start engaging around kind of everything that folks have been thinking about over the last, few weeks and months, and we'll be able to bring those together.
All right.
So we can go to Adam if he has any more budget related.
Yeah.
Anything else on that side too?
Yeah, and then we'll move. Adam, any?
Chair Miller, Director Sharpelo Hansen, members of the Board of Agriculture. I don't have a lot to add other than just a few things that we haven't maybe touched on as extensively in some of the previous comments. The last time I was in front of you was in December talking through our reduction list. We were asked to produce a 5% reduction list across our fund types, and there were some really tough conversations that were provoked through that. I'm here before you today, very grateful because we did not have to take almost any of those reductions. Some relatively minor vacancy savings reductions were what the legislature has asked for us to take, and we will do that. We are similarly situated across other natural resource agencies. Luckily, we did not have to take significant reductions, so wanted to raise that to your attention. We've talked through TLT and the wolf depredation money as well as the Japanese beetle money, so I won't belabor that unless there's any other questions. Just a few other things to draw a finer point around. Again, to Director Sharpelo Hansen's previous comment, yesterday was our budget kickoff meeting, so we do start turning towards that building of the 27-29 budget. And just want to thank Andrea Boyer and Adam Sandelbaugh and the entirety of our accounting and finance team that are really helping us move the ball forward there. Sincerely appreciate them. A few things to raise to your attention prior to our meeting next. The next revenue forecast, the June revenue forecast, actually comes out May 20th. The reason I draw your attention to that one is frequently that May forecast, you can see some significant volatility either to the upside or downside. That is the nearest revenue forecast otherwise put forward by the Office of Economic Analysis that captures any basically the results of the tax season. So you can have a little bit of a better understanding of what came in during tax season, to the good or to the bad. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that revenue forecast, as well as, again, to underline a previous comment made by Director Sharpelo Hansen, our other fund ending balances. As we start building our budget for 2 years, 27-29, we are keeping a very close eye on current burn rates and cash flow. And so as we move forward with that, very excited for our June meeting where we can start to talk more and we'll know more about that. So happy to take any questions.
I did have one question and then go to Director Sharplow-Hansen. Is there any kind of forecast or understanding with the decoupling of the federal and state tax focus on revenue impacts? And I assume that's effective January 1, 26. I might be wrong with that decoupling and what that will do. And if it's later, then of course it'll be later in the biennium.
Sure. I will apologize in advance, not being a tax expert, but I can give you my best understanding, Chair Miller. You're correct. It takes effect in January of next year. We did a kind of selective decoupling with the HR 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, otherwise passed at the federal level. Several changes made there. There was a conversation about to what degree we will decouple versus not decouple. Several changes were made on the tax front. There is some impact across the revenue, across the otherwise expected revenue. How that otherwise plays out, I will leave to the fullness of time, and those may be more educated to speak on it. But it's certainly something that we are keeping a close eye on.
Great. Appreciate that because of at least implications for agriculture and being able to write off equipment and, depreciate in 1 year and all that is going to be quite an impact. And I was hoping you'd say a silver lining for our budget woes in the state, but too early to tell, it sounds like. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks to the team for capturing it. I think just to put the finest point on it, we took about a 1% reduction in our general fund budget. So we feel really fortunate in that. And we were planning for that because we had direction back in September from the governor to plan for that 1%. I think as we prepare you for our June meeting, there are things that I want to talk about budget-wise that'll come before you. So as part of the agency budget, we will be required to do a prioritized program list. Some of you may have seen it in the past. It may have been a while since we've had one of those in front of you, but we have to prioritize all the programs in the agency. And so we'll probably run through that with you and see if you have any feedback for us before we submit our budget there. The other thing that we're required to do by law is prepare a reduction list in 2% increments up to 10% for every fund type in our budget. So general fund, lottery fund, federal funds, other funds. That is always a very difficult exercise. And it causes a lot of angst when we work through that. And so I want to get it out there now so that people know it's required by law. It's nothing any of us like to do, but it's part of the process. And that too, I think we'll want to run through with all of you in June, just to get another eye on it. And as we work through this, I think we're going to take a little different approach than maybe what we have in the past, because our budget is much tighter than what it's been in previous biennia. The last two biennia, the cost of doing business in state government has gone up significantly with cost of living raises and other things. And so we just are tight. I mean, especially on the cash side. And so as we work through some of these discussions and making choices, I really want to incorporate some of the conversation with our labor management committee so that we can talk about the choices, because they're hard. And unless you talk about it with people, it feels like it's been done to them. And I don't want that as part of the culture at ODA. And so I think I'm just going to continue to be really open and transparent in these conversations. It's hard. Budget is tight. We have some cash flow issues, and we have a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you for that pre-warning that will, and I recall looking in the past at some of that, but I'm not sure we really took a real deep dive into that as a board, but that is something that makes a whole lot of sense that we go ahead and do so. Maybe just during this section, we'll have the governor's office here, and we're going to be talking about the executive orders tomorrow and be able to ask questions. But one of them that didn't have as much background in our background material, and I don't know if any of you can speak to it, is the Prosperity Initiative for the governor's office. Is there anything other than just asking questions tomorrow? Any other background on that would help us? And because we wrote, again, we wrote the letter in regards to that to the governor about, really the impacts of current regulation and other things that are a real challenge for agriculture today. And not only the new bright, shiny, wonderful things are great, but also just the core concern over competition and all of that with other states. So is there anything we need to hear about before we just maybe launch into some questions tomorrow?
I think it's fair to ask questions. There's a lot of work going on. I think the Prosperity Council met here in Redmond last month, I believe. I think there are several members of the council that have, I'm going to say, agribusiness background, which I think is helpful given time and space of where we're at. And really grateful for that. I also know the governor brought on a prosperity officer, Tim Knopp, former legislator. He has been doing a lot of work and out and about, meeting with companies. Courtney Crowell in the Governor's Natural Resource Office, who we work very closely with, has been doing a lot of work around business retention. So I think there definitely is an eye to the need to grow the economy. And if my memory serves me correctly, the council has a meeting in Pendleton coming up as well.
I think they just met in Klamath also yesterday morning. But they are also kind of doing more outreach around the state and plan to have their draft plan in June of this year. The other thing I'll add to Lisa's background is we are really looking for ways to tie our pilot food and ag business centers really closely to the prosperity plan. You'll hear about those tomorrow from staff as well.
Okay.
The other one thing I just want to mention is the governor also put together a work group on data centers in the state that also will have meetings through June. And they've had one meeting. The next meeting is on water, but we can share that with the board. I didn't get anything into your booklets, but there's public comment available around that. That was put together kind of during this session to address the potential of data center development.
Great. Well, we're certainly pleased that the governor's office is going to be here and represented. So I just wanted to touch on that one other point. But it sounds like any questions we have make sense. So that's great. Okay, super. Anything else from the team on this? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the effort, Jonathan, Adam, Lindsay, and teams of people, including I know Lisa spent a lot of personal time on the legislature this year. So we are running ahead of schedule, which is not normally something I announce. So what we can do, I'm thinking, do we have our 6 o'clock speaker is likely not here yet, correct? Okay, so what we'll do, let's take a break until about, that's a little too long. Let's have 5 till 5. And then as we had talked about earlier, let's then go into the board business discussion, and that allows anybody externally that heard we do it a little later, that it's going to be a little earlier. So at 5 till 5, we'll go into the board business discussion and those updates. So, all right, let's take a quick break till 5:05. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and get started again, everybody. Okay, so we will now go ahead and start some discussions in regards to board business. Again, we move that from tomorrow to now. Barbara's not feeling well, and so that's why she's not here. She would have started out with the Soil and Water Conservation District report, but if she's able to make it any time tomorrow, we'll squeeze that in for tomorrow. So the first agenda item, and actually, where should everybody look so they're looking at the right page? So if we look at day 2 agenda.
Should be number 9.
Yeah, number 9. So if we go ahead and then move into the resolution process we discussed last time. And that resolution process, we ended up, many thanks to John, who did a lot of work in writing up what that process looks like. There's very few tweaks. This was all in your board book in advance. Very few tweaks to the resolution itself. And so I'd like to open it up before we have a full motion to move forward. We did not, we publicized it. We didn't receive any comments on it. But again, it's moving toward a more streamlined process. And John, do you want to describe that just, since you were the author extraordinaire of making sure you captured our thoughts on that?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Miller. Yeah, under tab 9 in your board books, you'll see a quick memo overview of our proposed new process to review board resolutions. Also included under tab 13 is a full comprehensive list of all the current active resolutions that came as a request from last meeting. So I prepared that for you all too. Simple table lists resolution number, the title, very, very general description of what the resolution does. And that'll be included in your board books going forward. And then just to recap, we stopped the automatic 3-year periodic reviews of all resolutions from last meeting. And then the changes to board resolution 000 really reflect taking away the language about the working groups. Due to the changes in the public meetings law, we're stopping the working group process. So cleaning up that language, saying that we'll follow the public meeting law, that's really the only big change with 000.
So it's under the blue under 9, and so first is just the explanation, and then secondly is the markup of the 000. And so really how the process will work, we're going to kind of do it for the first time today if this passes, that we'll, for every board meeting, we'll have all the resolutions listed. And during the board session, we'll say, hey, are there any things we need to maybe consider for thinking about and putting on our agenda? Because again, instead of these subcommittees, because public meetings law, we can't do that very easily, or we're just going to be committee of the whole and be able to discuss the resolutions as a committee of the whole. But if we highlight, hey, we need to look at some different resolutions for our, let's say, for our upcoming June meeting, then what we can do is staff will work on potential, whatever we've asked for, potential amendments or anything like that. And then it will go through the normal, public process of anything we change ends up having to be made public. But I would like to entertain a motion to, again, this has had public notice. We received no comments on it. I'd like to have a motion to accept 000 as amended.
I so move.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
I so second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
So the first bullet under resolution development and review process, at the end it says or initiated by the board at the request of an outside party. And I just want to clarify what I think that means, that we're not, if somebody submits a comment that says the board should review resolution X, Y, or Z, we could decline to even view it. So I just want to make it clear, and I think this language is consistent with that, but I wanted to make sure that others agreed that just because someone asks us to review, we might decide not to take any action on that resolution at that time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. All right. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, motion carries. All right. Next up, we have our 2026 meeting schedule. And John, do you want to go over that with us as well?
Sure. June, the dates did not change. So we'll be in Madras at that hotel. And then September will be those dates listed, the 2nd through the 4th. And you all should have calendar invites for that. And we'll be in Astoria. So when I tried to find a coastal location, the central and southern coasts were pretty expensive during that time of year. So we landed in Astoria again for that date. And then December will be virtual. So those dates will probably be shorter than what's listed. I don't know, Lisa, if you have thoughts.
Director Sharplow-Henson, did you?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I think probably we'll do some type of abbreviated December meeting depending on where we're at. Could be focused around budget going into the session. It's a long day to spend, 6 hours online in a meeting. And so just recognizing that, we'll work on the agenda with all of you and figure out how to break it up so we aren't all sitting in front of the screen for
multiple hours.
Break
it up in some way. And again, the reason why we were doing December virtual is really from a budgetary standpoint. And we needed to be doing our part. Even though we ended up in a better place, I think it's still a good decision that we were doing December. And December can always be a fun time for travel, no matter where you are, since we're all coming from different places. So anyway, great.
Madam Chair, may I ask another question?
Sure.
I would ask the board to think about locations for 2027 because it is just around the corner. You have in the past expressed some interest in trying to meet with potentially other natural resource boards or commissions. I know that the Department of Land Conservation Development and the Water Resources Commission did a joint meeting recently, and I think it was very successful. If there is interest in doing that, I think we need to have John start on it sooner rather than later because it will likely break up the cadence that we have. The commissions tend to have, a more specific cadence than maybe what we have had in the past. But, just thinking about that for 2027. The other thing, 2027, big legislative session. Typically, we're in Salem in the first January, February timeline because it's hard for staff to travel. And in the past, the board has done some legislative meetings, and that's something for you to think about as well, is if the board is interested in having legislative meetings to talk about board issues, board report, because we should have another board report coming out about that time, your biennial report that talks about the state of agriculture. So just a couple of things for you all to be noodling on, looking a little farther out in the calendar.
Okay, so if we do our quote-unquote normal cadence for 2027, this meeting, because we wanted to have it combined with FFA, we're a little off on our cadence. But what would be the timing for that meeting? And then maybe what we should ask is that work from timing to legislative meetings and all that, because we've met in different times during that first quarter in the past. So I just want to make sure everybody thinks it's right. So, John, what would that date be? Guess it'd be
First quarter would
March.
be March 3rd through 5th, Wednesday.
March 3rd through the 5th. Okay. So it's definitely well into session. Just hearing from Lisa, Jonathan, others, is that okay timing for our board meeting?
Let Jonathan talk about some of the legislative deadlines, and the only other thing that I would have concern about is budget presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair Miller, members of the board, that would be, I mean, it's always the budget presentation question on when we have it. And then in terms of the deadlines, I think that is, I'm trying to recall quickly, I think that is prior to typically first chamber deadline. And so that would be an okay timing for, you're still able to discuss relevant bills type of a thing.
And for any budget discussion, still okay for ODA?
Typically, yeah. So, I mean, the last couple years we've had, it was either early April, late March is when but that's.
Yeah, you don't know. So how about this? Because we put you on the spot, but you're the keeper of all knowledge legislative. So let's go ahead and think about it that March 2nd through 5th, that we'd combine it with legislative visits. If for some reason it pops up soon anyway, just to go ahead and double check and see if that still feels comfortable. And I'd just like to ask the board, we in the past have had legislative meetings that thank you, the team has set up. It's difficult, but they've been very fruitful. I think those discussions have been, for those of us who've been on it before. Is that something you would like to do? Because that's instead of a tour, instead of a farm tour, we do legislative visits. I'm looking at nods. Yes, Director Dill?
One, I really like that idea, and I'm sad that you said that after I was thinking about another potential would be maybe coincide with the Oregon State Small Farmers Conference. I don't know if there's a way to, get that audience plugged in with what we're doing here and ODA, but these are all the emerging farmers, small farms. So just want to throw it out there. That's I think the last week in February, so like a week before our normal cadence.
Okay.
Just a thought, but I like the idea of the legislative visits too.
Is there something we can look at to have them maybe highlighted, maybe as even a presentation or something too? So, and I won't be chair then, I hope. So somebody else will be getting to do that. So anyway, so.
Yeah, so in terms of the Small Farms Conference at OSU, the agency has a presence there. In fact, we were there just recently, and I think we had representation from every program or division, every division as part of it. So, but there are we could think about some type of presentation, or maybe working with Lauren Gwynn to do something with the board.
And then maybe 28. Because it'll be an off session. Yeah, because this meeting has been pretty darn full in the past because we're in the midst of session. There's always some interesting policy bills that we, dealt with last time. So, okay, so that's at least maybe we can set that. Now let's talk about an agency. We have talked for a long time about DEQ, or EQC rather, to do a joint meeting. Certainly water, now energy, but this is 27, but who knows? So any preference you all have? And because we will have to, in order to get on any of those agendas for some joint meetings, have to do that really early.
I would like to do water, but I think in the meantime, maybe DEQ and talking about the things that we have earlier today are probably better uses of our time.
Okay.
Although we want to get water someday.
All right. Well, and again, we can invite water to come and chat with us, which we have, but not necessarily the higher levels of the agency. So, yeah. Lisa, any preference from your standpoint of priority or?
I think DEQ makes a lot of sense because, ODA carries out the non-point source of the Clean Water Act. So we work very closely. The CAFA program, we work closely with the EQC. We have memorandums of understanding around water quality. I think it's a good fit.
And also from an EQC and DEQ standpoint, the whole focus on what is it? Responsible. Help me out. Thank you. Extended producer responsibility. Yes, for sure. But that's still 27, but there's probably going to be a lot going on with the litigation that's happening and everything else that's happening, and hearing, I guess there was quite a bit of testimony in agriculture this fall. So did you have more? Director? Okay. Okay. All right. So let's shoot for finding out when EQC's meetings are. Gosh, if stars aligned and it was, it could be our June meeting, so it'd be sooner than later, but let's just see. Jonathan, did you happen to?
Yeah, Chairman, I would also put out for consideration by the board, ODFW. There's going to be a lot of crossover, especially with the executive order that you're going to hear tomorrow around kind of the working lands, the habitat conservation, and the desirable, the attribute settings. And so I think, if DEQ maybe, we're not able to kind of coordinate a meeting,
That could be an alternative?
that I think would be pretty good conversation, so.
Okay. And not saying that we won't have water as a speaker or whatever, because I think part of our role is to be able to have a voice for agriculture with our sister agencies and working with our sister agencies on things going forward. So, okay, that's 26 and 27 meetings. Any other, from a geography, sometimes we throw it out too. But what we normally look at is where we haven't been lately and how does that coincide with the issues. So that's something, John, you and team can work through, and yeah, good. All right, so the next item on the agenda is, now that we have the 000, I called it 00, but 000 resolution in place, that again, we received copies of all the resolutions. And the question is there something we want to tee up, or some we want to tee up for discussion to say, hey, does this need to be revised, updated, changed, refocused, etc.? I'll take the liberty to mention, in light of the farm store bill, it might be a really good idea to take a look at all of our land use resolutions and, ensure we're conforming with statute, unless we just disagree, but conforming with statute, and also just for clarity and simplicity. Because I think part of the dilemma we've had is things haven't been very simple for us in this area. But I don't know if anybody has any comments in that regard.
So I completely agree, and it's not only about farm stores, it's also data centers, it's energy facility siting.
Solar siting.
Yeah, so it seems to me that instead, because there are multiple resolutions that touch on land use in some way, having us focus on that suite of resolutions makes a lot of sense right now.
Great. I'm seeing nods around the table. I guess Director Sharplow's hands, is that something that the staff can take any resolution that touches on land use, and we'll look at them in a collective way and maybe look at proposing how we can either simplify, do we have, is there a way to combine, or maybe it's still separate, or, whatever, but just, we've never looked at them collectively. We've always done one by one, and they've been like in, 1 year, the next year, 1 year, 1 year. And so it's not been a comprehensive look. So what do you think?
I think it's a great idea to look at them comprehensively and maybe think about how we would look at a single. I think the other thing that has happened recently is we've been looking at positions within the agency. I believe it was Jonathan was looking at how many places we consult around land use and our responsibilities there. I think it'd be good for us to touch on that with the board too, so that we all had an understanding about what the crossover is with ODA's responsibilities.
Okay, so you're talking about really our current authorities.
We really don't have authority. We don't have
Okay.
authority, but there are places where we're asked to consult on policy, right? And so to bring the agricultural interests forward. And I think it would be good for all of us to understand what are those places in
And that
the
should be
land
also
use
part of the resolutions too, potentially.
arena, and so that we all have a collective understanding. Because if anything became apparent over the last several months working through the farm store legislation, work groups process, is how complicated and complex land use is, and just we've always had an expert. That it was, everything he did, and Jim was very good at it, but the rest of us may not have had such a good feel for it. I'll just own it. I didn't. And had relied on staff for a lot of that. So I think
So do I as a board member own it.
that having a better understanding of how we weigh in and how the process is set up today.
All right, go ahead. Chad.
Yeah, Chad, Alan here. I know you guys are kind of keeping staff flat right now and stuff, but I mean, just in terms of just recognizing the amount of lifetime knowledge that Jim brought to the department in that land use area. I mean, do you guys sort of see somebody within a department that can bring that knowledge forward too, or at least see the necessity to have somebody at that expertise level within the department itself?
Thank you for the question. So right now, the current expert is in Lindsay, with what she learned through the process. I mean, she's done the quick study to work through it. The NRS 5 position that has historically been the land use position in the agency was held vacant for vacancy savings. We are looking at that position now to think about how we would fill it, to have someone who focused on that type of work as well as some other things. I think it's too much of a luxury for where we're at today in the agency to have a person that only does one thing with so much specific knowledge in that area, because there are so many new issues coming at ag. We need some more breadth across additional subjects. So we're starting to look at the position description and thinking about how to bring someone on to help us with that. It's a general funded position.
Okay. Well, it sounds like there is some flexibility in looking at, because others have been asked. So thank you, Director Allen, for bringing that up. And so you're looking at it, exploring it, and obviously there was a huge knowledge dump this year with current folks in regards to these issues too. So yeah,
Well,
Director Allen, get.
there's got to be some assistance through DLCD, and I mean there's certainly people within that organization that have that planning background and knowledge.
DLC was a great partner with us in terms of helping to bring Lindsay up to speed and helping her work through issues that we were not, familiar with. And so they've been a great partner. And yes, there is expertise there, but having, someone who has more bandwidth to work in that area to help us, I think there is need.
Sorry, if I can just add one thing. I think the other thing that we have realized is that these are kind of cross-cutting across different types of issues in the economic development tie-in. Our sister agency in Travel Oregon that we do a lot of our global partnership with has a real interest. So I think broadening the position more to an economic development and industry as a whole, because those have kind of traditionally been in the land use planning space, especially when we talk about agritourism and some of those things. So that broadness, I think we also found is needed.
There you go. You just got some of our internal discussions and, you know, the push and pull that's going on amongst us about what we need and where we need it.
Well, great. Any other comments along those lines? I think, you know, you're thinking about, obviously ahead of us, thinking about the right things. And we will look forward to hearing how this goes and what you decide. So as far as resolutions, let's call it land use collectively, anything that touches, understand how we touch and how the processes work. And again, to bring that together for discussion does May make sense? Or June, rather, makes sense. Well, you'd have to put it out in May, but.
I would ask for a little leniency here from the board with some room to do some work over a period of time. I don't think this is anything that we're going to be able to put through a cookie cutter and have something pop out on the other side that anybody's going to be happy with. It will likely create additional public interest, even starting the conversations here with the board. If you remember when we did, I think it was 319, we had a lot of public input around it. And so I think there's some work we need to do as an agency, as staff around it. I think there's some education with the board.
Okay.
In terms of what's in the resolutions and what it means, and so that we all understand what the words mean, and then working it through the process of where we need to be.
Yes.
So just on a quick glance through the list of resolutions, you know, I come up with at least 9 that I would say are primarily focused on or significantly focused on land use. And so I wonder if even for our June meeting, have a discussion about, or a proposal on the table about the best way to chew through these, and just some thought given prior to our June meeting to how do we tackle do we have to tackle all 9 together, or is there a way to say, actually the most generic of these is X or X, Y, and Z. Let's tackle those first and then decide whether we even need any more, or that's phase 1 and then phase 2 looks like something else.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the bite-sized approach.
Yeah, and it's creating an awareness, and then based upon that, we would look at whatever potential, you know, revisions. But again, we need to understand versus just here's the 9, everybody read them. I think we're going to need to have some thoughtful presentation, and I don't mind you saying, and by the way, the new legislation passed, here are things that might need to be different. If that wouldn't be too big a lift, then we can then do the more of a bite-sized approach. Does that work for everybody? Okay, all right. So we've got that. And again, we'll have this discussion at every meeting. We've got something to get started on, but if there is another niggling area from a resolution standpoint that we at least want to highlight, that we want to be thinking about this year, are there any others that we might want to deal with? Yes.
Chair, I think after we visit with the governor's staff tomorrow, we may have a couple things we're going to want to touch on, or maybe some wording changes and some resolutions. So.
Good. Okay. That's a good idea. Good idea. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So now, this is our first time we have take a look at all of them. And there's a lot fewer than I thought there were. Given the numbering system, sometimes you look at a numbering system, you go, we must have like 300 of these things. But we don't, because I think there had been a lot of work on the part of the Board of Ag when Stephanie Halleck had been chair. I think it when one of her missions in life was to let's pare down, get rid of what's obsolete, let's change what, that kind of stuff. So I think it got pared down. So the other thing to think about is not only looking at the resolutions, is there anything missing? When we talk about priorities, I had not been on the previous subcommittee, and maybe some of you guys weren't either because you're newer, regarding labor. And because there had been so much focus in last legislative session, I'm anticipating probably again this next year, is there something different or more that we might want to look at from a labor standpoint? Director Norris.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to also piggyback off of Eric's comment, and I hope we make some time at the end of tomorrow where we can propose more, because I would love to take a moment to actually read through some of these resolutions. But in terms for workforce, I'm not going to formulate my thoughts very well around it, but 169, just with the H2A program, and so much work has been done recently with changes to that. So that would be one that I'd be interested in, but we can revisit that tomorrow if I still hold that thought.
What we'll do, we'll try to carve out some time tomorrow. And again, I'm still in my stalling phase here and actually I'll ask John while we're still talking, is there anything else on tomorrow's agenda we can bring up early that we can get done so we can make time after the governor's office visit to be able to have that discussion tomorrow? John.
I don't think so. The rest is all presentations.
Okay.
Folks who aren't here.
Okay. What is the new time we need to be out of here tomorrow?
I think if we can wrap up by 1:30 after that public comment period.
Okay, so that's 2 hours. Is that 2 hours early?
It's an hour.
I mean 1 hour early. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other ideas? Yes.
I think we can be relatively quick on the rulemaking update.
Okay.
I think Sunny can streamline that for sure. And so that'll give us a little bit of extra time as well.
All right. Okay. And is there, because we'll have the Deschutes Land Trust, and then we are having a guest for dinner tonight. Is that, no, oh, we're not. Okay. Okay. I thought we had somebody potentially coming. All right. So, well, hey, this hasn't happened before where we're so far ahead. How about this? We actually have our speaker starts speaking at 6 and may get here about 10 minutes early. So we've got at least 20 minutes. Why don't we go ahead and do a break? Because our food's not here either, so we can't start eating. Why don't we go ahead and do a break? And during that break, I'd like you to take a look at these resolutions. So even if we have a little bit of time later tonight, we might be able to squeeze something in too. So, but certainly if other things come up tomorrow, we can talk about them. So, okay, so let's reconvene at 10 of 6. Okay, thanks.
Hi, nice to meet
If the weather's right, we're not getting fogged in all that crap. I got one field that we need second, third cutting, and feed it to off dry cattle.
All right, let's go ahead and reconvene. We have about 10 minutes, and there was a couple things that we needed to mention and talk about before we ask our speaker to come up. So, Director Hansen, would you like to talk about the? No, go ahead.
So big failure on my part during my board report. I didn't mention International Year of the Woman Farmer. If you've been following us, I know, woo! Once a week, we are featuring women farmers across the state, different sizes, different regions. And it has been incredibly popular. And so staff have just done a really good job. So if you have women farmers that you want to nominate, do that. We're taking them in, and the plan is every Friday through the end of the year, we will spotlight on women in agriculture. So it was exciting, and sorry, that would be the cold medicine thought in my head, Carla, that I forgot that.
So we have good team helping us, right? And speaking of a team, John, would you mind sending that link or the announcement of that out to the board specifically to say, hey, jarring our memories. So, okay. Good deal. The second thing we didn't cover earlier, and I'm still stalling on resolution in case you did want to talk about this moment, but no, the second thing was there are certain opportunities that that we as a board have, and one of those opportunities is actually nominating one of us to serve on OWEB. Barbara Boyer has been on OWEB for, I don't know how many years, quite a long time, done a beautiful job. Thinking about maybe it's about time that wouldn't be happening anymore. So I wanted to mention it to this board that it's not a light lift, but I think it's a good lift and it's a good opportunity. And so to the extent if anyone is interested to chat with me or chat with Lisa about that, and Lisa can, because she kind of was sitting in that position before, might be able to speak to what that job really is.
OWEB is a really interesting opportunity in terms of it's one of the largest boards in state government. And the board functions as, I'm going to call it the controller for the funding of projects across the state, paid for with Measure 76 dollars, PCSRF dollars. And so staff review applications, bring packets to for restoration, watershed restoration and other things. And I think for this board, one of the interesting opportunities to really think about, if you are interested, is around working lands and the governor's initiatives as we talk about working lands and how agriculture fits into that space and the opportunities that are there. So, I mean, I think it could be the work is interesting. OEB has amazing tours, and the work is incredibly inspirational. You're going to hear about some of it from Rika. So if you have time, I mean, I think it is something to consider. Board packets are heavy, though, on big, twice a year, open solicitations. It's a pretty heavy workload.
Because you basically decide on the projects, but there's a lot of staff support to get you there. So anyway, I just wanted to mention it to, you know, if any curiosity is piqued and want to learn more, that would be great. But we did double check statutorily. It has to be a Board of Ag member. It can't be appointed by us. So I thought that might be an angle too for as an opportunity. But and I know everybody's, you know, load is heavy. So, Kurt.
Is it an ex officio position or a voting position?
It's voting. I'm going to think about this for a second. It's a voting. It is
Yeah.
a voting.
Yeah.
The federal partners are non-voting members of the board, but there are the board members that are appointed by the governor, and then the members that
agency.
sit from other boards and commissions are voting members as well.
Yeah. So anyway, something to think about, ponder on. And from time to time, there are opportunities to serve representing different roles, which sometimes with a governor's EO that might represent us, or potentially in the past, there's been some DEQ work and other things that we may need to tap. But, you know, appreciate your service on this board and your attention to focus and detail here. But there are wonderful other opportunities to expand your horizons when most of you really do need extra things to do. So no, I'm just kidding. That I just wanted to mention it, but this would be a really, I think, a really fun and interesting opportunity for someone. Okay. Anything more on the resolutions? And we will carve a little time tomorrow. So, but if there was something tonight still, and if not, Rika, I'd like to have you come forward. Thank you for coming early. For the first time in the history of a long time, even prior to my being chair, we actually are ahead of time, which is, yeah. So thank you very, very much for spending some time with us. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, board members and Lisa and the whole group here for having the Land Trust join you in our, I was going to say corner of the state, but turns out we're sort of in the middle, so not really a corner at all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rika Ayat. I'm the Executive Director for Deschutes Land Trust. I have been in my job for about 5 years now, and our Land Trust actually last year just turned 30 years old, so we've been doing work here for quite a while. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen on your Teams call, so you'll be able to see some slides, I think, up here on this screen. There we go. And
we have a couple screens down here too, so.
Just waiting for that to catch up. Okay, great. So, the mission of the Deschutes Land Trust is to conserve and care for the lands and waters that sustain Central Oregon so local communities and the natural world can flourish together for generations to come. Our organization is made up of now 16 staff, 17 board members, and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers and supporters throughout Central Oregon and the state. Just a little bit about the Land Trust by the numbers. Our total conserved acres to date are 18,742 acres and growing. Of those, the Land Trust owns about a little over 10,000 acres in fee title. The other conserved acres we own through conservation easements, which we'll be talking quite a bit about today. It talks a little bit about our support base. We're largely, for our general operations, are privately funded through private donations from local community members. A lot of our projects, restoration, land protection, those are state and federally funded, but really our bread and butter and the work we do every day is funded by members of our community. I mentioned our staff board and volunteers, and in addition to land protection, we also are actively restoring lands, particularly fee title lands that the Land Trust owns, which is over 10 miles of streams restored, 1,600 acres of forest restoration, 2,000 acres of upland restoration and counting, and we maintain 20 miles of trail that's accessible to the public. So a little bit about where we work. I mentioned it's not a corner. This is a little bit hard to see here on this screen. It's actually sort of more of a triangle, but the service area of the Deschutes Land Trust is essentially the Deschutes River Basin and all of its affiliated subbasins. A lot of our work, especially early on in the Land Trust work, was centered in sisters and particularly along Waichuse Creek. You can see here we have a number of conserved properties in that area and in the sisters area, but really in the last 5 to 10 years, the Land Trust has been significantly expanding our footprint in the Deschutes Basin. We're working in the Trout Creek watershed on the lower Deschutes. You can see here our Pride A Ranch property, which is just outside of Willowdale. We're also working in South Deschutes County, so we have conservation projects both in Lapine and all the way down to Crescent. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today is our work in the Crooked River Basin, particularly our work in Crook County. So I want to talk a little bit about how we conserve land, but before I do that, for the board members, how many of you are familiar with conservation easements generally and how they work? Somewhat. Okay, I've got some slides in here and I'm just going to acknowledge that some of this may be information that you already know, but for the purposes of, I made the slide, I'll cover it anyway.
It's good for the public.
Yeah. So the Land Trust conserves lands. We're guided by our conservation strategy. And our conservation strategy really looks at 3 core priorities for how we evaluate where we're going to do conservation projects. So one of the things we look at is climate resiliency, so to think about protecting, conserving, and restoring lands that are going to make our communities and our lands more resilient to climate change going forward. We look at ecological integrity, so things that are in good condition or can be restored to good condition, and by good condition I mean they provide good and significant habitat for fish and wildlife. And we also look at community values. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit today. And these things are really all weighted equally. And we protect lands for cultural significance, and in particular, we protect lands for community health, economic, and other community values. When we talk about conservation easements, particularly in the communities here in Central Oregon, working lands for our communities are really tied to this idea of community health and are really tied to community economic development and community economic viability. And those values are tied to working lands conservation in a way that makes those working lands conservation projects a priority for us in addition to those other ecological priorities we mentioned. In order to make these conservation decisions, we work with tribes, we work with cities and counties, we work with a broad land conservation community, lots of other regional, local, national land trusts that are working also here in this basin, and lots of agencies and NGOs, a veritable alphabet soup of partners, of which you are now one officially. Welcome. And so once we've made a decision to move forward with the conservation project, they generally take 2 forms. When I talked earlier about fee title acres, the acres the Land Trust owns, those sort of show up as what we call community preserves. Those are lands that the Land Trust owns. Many of them have open access to the public. Some of them you can access only on tours, but they're basically lands that we own, conserve, restore, and manage for the community and for fish and wildlife. The other method that we use to do land conservation is through conservation easements. This is a picture of Gail Baker and her husband who own Rimrock Ranch and sisters. Lisa, you remember you visited Rimrock with me a few years ago. These were cattle ranchers on Waichuse Creek who pursued a conservation easement with the Land Trust. They're one of many landowners in the area who are either currently working with the Land Trust or interested in pursuing conservation easements. For the purpose of today, I'm really going to be talking not about our community preserves, but more about where our work intersects with working lands conservation. So I'll be talking quite a bit about conservation easements and sharing some examples of where that's happening here in Central Oregon. But also we're going to be talking about habitat mitigation, which is sort of more of an emerging way that the Land Trust is engaging with working lands conservation. And we'll give some examples of how that's showing up here in Central Oregon too. Any questions before I get into talking about easements? All right. So working lands easements. Easements allow farmers and ranchers to permanently protect their land from development and fragmentation. They allow farmers and ranchers to continue agricultural and forestry production. They allow farmers and ranchers to get cash out of their real estate without selling or developing parcels, which can be helpful for succession planning or business expansion. Conservation easements also reduce property values, making farms and ranches more affordable for the next generation. And also important to us and to communities, conservation easements protect important habitat for fish, wildlife, and native plants. This is the diagram that the Land Trust Alliance uses to illustrate conservation easements. I've never bought 2 sticks from a bundle of sticks. I don't know if you have, but this is sort of the way they're explaining how conservation easement works. But essentially the way that they work is that the value of your land shows up in many ways, and for you is bundled up, right? There are some things in that bundle that you in your agricultural operation do not have an urgent, immediate, or long-term need for. So obviously you want to be able to use and enjoy your land, to own and possess your land, to exclude others, to transfer by sale or gift your land, and also to operate your business there. When the Land Trust purchases a conservation easement from a landowner, essentially what we're purchasing are the rights to subdivide that land and to develop that land. And so we buy those 2 sticks. You, the landowner, keep all of the other sticks. And apologies again for this stick analogy. I hope someday they maybe get something more current. So conservation easements are notable in 3 ways. One, they're permanent. And so when a landowner enters into a conservation easement agreement with a land trust, that easement remains in effect forever, regardless of future property ownership. So it follows the property owner to owner. They're customizable, so the agreements are tailored to the individual property owner, the individual agricultural operation, and the landowner goals. So not all easements look the same. They're really a negotiation between the land trust and the landowner. And they're voluntary. So these are landowners who choose to enter into these agreements without outside compulsion. And so these are really landowners who approach us with this interest, and we work together to figure out whether there's a path forward. There's a slight delay on my slide, so if I'm staring off into space, I'm just waiting for it to change. So some of the monetary benefits of conservation easements, essentially when the land trust purchases a conservation easement from a landowner, the value of that land is decreased, right? Because you're foregoing your right to develop or partition that property. The amount of that decrease, the loss in value of that property, is then paid to that landowner, and that can happen in a number of ways. So landowners can sell a conservation easement for cash to a land trust. A land trust can make a cash payment to a landowner. You can also, they're tax deductible, and so you can take that payment as an income tax deduction instead of a cash payment. Most conservation easements show up as bargain sales, which is sort of a mix of cash and the income tax benefits, the donation piece. You can also leverage conservation easements into 1031 exchanges, and so you can take those funds and turn around and buy additional properties to increase the size of your operation. And they also have estate tax benefits because you can reduce, by reducing the value of your property and cashing that out through a tax deductible mechanism, you can reduce estate taxes for your heirs before that transfer happens. So I'm going to give you an example of a conservation easement that we're working on now. Does anyone here on this board know Jim Wood of Aspen Valley Ranch in Post, Oregon? That surprises me. He's been a relatively regular fixture and advocate for conservation easements at the state level. If any of you serve on the OWEB board at any point, you will probably come into contact with Jim. Jim owns and operates an 18,000-acre working cattle ranch near Post, Oregon, which is a geographic center of Oregon. The land trusts, Jim and the land trust are currently working on a 3-phase conservation easement. The terms of the easement are like most easements. It prohibits partitioning of the property and prohibits development, mining, roads, buildings, etc. Jim's easement is, like most easements, a mixture of cash and donated easement. And for Jim, there's a number of motivations for him to partner with the land trust. One, his family, he's I think the second generation rancher here at Aspen Valley Ranch, but has really seen a lot of changes coming to his community, seeing increased development and increased luxury residential development in his community. And he feels it's important for him to conserve the rural character and agricultural character of the community where he lives and works. It's also important to him because, like many farms and ranches, his succession plan is not as firm as probably he would like it at his stage in life. I don't know if this is still the case, but there was a time where Jim's son was pursuing a professional skateboarding career, which obviously really makes you think about the future of your ranch and what will happen to it when you're no longer here. In addition to that, there are a number of opportunities for Jim to expand his operation through that 1031 exchange option and grow his ranching operation, make it more profitable and sustainable. And so for all of those reasons, some monetary, some values-based, it made sense for Jim to work with the land trust. The reason the easement is happening in 3 phases is really due to funding. We'd love to do the entire easement and make one payment to Jim so that he can get on with his ranching business and not have to negotiate multiple easements with the land trust. But really, the funding for the real barrier to doing more of these easements in our area and in the state is funding. It's really limited. Oregon, it's particularly relative to other states, has very limited funding available for conservation easements. And so these projects can take a long time because the funding is highly competitive, and sometimes it takes several cycles to get your project funded. Funding for Jim's easements was primarily provided by NRCS, the ASEP ALE program. This is a national program that's operated through the Farm Bill. It's a very well-funded program, but it does require a 50% match. Oregon State Matching Program, the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, or OAHP, has been like many things, sort of woefully underfunded. If that state program were fully funded, the ASEP ALE program would have no problem keeping up, and we could really execute a lot more of these agreements. But in the meantime, we're phasing them and moving them forward as best we can. We also get private funding for these in many cases. Jim's project received support from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and other local philanthropic organizations. I will say it sometimes can be challenging to raise private philanthropy dollars for conservation easements because the land does stay with the owner. It's a little bit different and a little bit harder for donors to understand, but there is a core group of folks in the philanthropy sector who really believe in this work. And we also receive funding for Jim's easement through solar mitigation. And I'll be talking a little bit more about solar mitigation as we move forward, but that was another funding mechanism to help fund the payment to Jim for that easement. So this is where Aspen Valley Ranch is located. I know it's a little bit hard to see on this map, but you can see if you're going into the upper crooked there along the Post-Paulina Highway. Aspen Valley Ranch there is highlighted in red. Just as a note, in green there, there's a big parcel of fee title land that's owned by the Nature Conservancy, Juniper Hills Preserve. And in a lot of cases, that's important to the land trust because we're looking at how to expand on existing conserved acres. We're also looking at
how many acres is that? I couldn't read it.
Of how many acres is Aspen Valley or Juniper Hills?
Yeah, Jim's.
Jim's is 18,000 total. And so when we're looking at these conservation easements, you saw sort of our three-circle Venn diagram of, what our conservation values are and how we're evaluating projects for conservation. And that climate resiliency and ecological integrity, that's a big part of how we make these decisions. This map and those red dots there, you can see that those are the results of elk flight data from ODFW. You're also looking at critical mule deer winter range and also sage grouse habitat, red band trout distribution, and just lots of really critical and important wildlife habitat that's overlaid with Jim's ranch. And I think for those of you here or those of you listening who are in the farming and ranching business, I think it should come as no surprise that while these lands are working, they're also providing critical habitat for fish and wildlife, and particularly these large intact ranches, as you can see here on this map, are really, really important for large ungulates like elk and deer. And so, but if you're out there working, you see that every day. The other thing we look at when we're looking at conservation easements is, I mentioned these big intact pieces, particularly in Central Oregon. Those are really important for fish and wildlife, particularly for wildlife. And the Post Paulina Valley, that whole area has become a priority, really the Upper Crooked for the Land Trust for conservation easements, because you can see here on this map how many big blocks of color there are as you move further west in the state. Maps like these are really hard to find. Mostly things are little tiny dots of color, but you've got some really large properties. You can see there, Jim's, the big red property, you can see sort of towards the left, that's Bonneview Ranch. Some of you may have seen that one get listed for sale recently. On the other side of that big green property, that property is Ochiko Ranch. Some of these names on here I think are a little bit outdated. It's now Ochiko Ranch, formerly Orion Ranch. That property is also currently for sale. And then all the way over up to the other side, over to Ochiko Creek, there's a green property there that's called Keystone Ranch, and we're going to be talking about that one in a little bit. But you can see as the Land Trust, we're looking at this area and seeing opportunities for enhanced connectivity and keeping this valley, as a working landscape, but making sure that we're protecting long-term those values for wildlife. Before I get into habitat mitigation, does anybody have any questions about easements or how we do them or how they work or don't?
So Rika, can you talk a little bit about the difference between a working lands easement and a conservation easement? Because they are a little different, like in that OWEB world.
Yeah, so, conservation easements are the umbrella term that talk about really when as opposed to the Land Trust purchasing land in fee title, conservation easements refer to the practice of buying development or partitioning rights from that land. And that we do that for a number of reasons. But really in Central Oregon, primarily the reason we are doing and where we are doing conservation easements are in working lands context, right? Number one, because those tend to be the largest, most intact pieces of ground with the highest ecological integrity. So that's really why it's important to partner with, particularly in Central Oregon, with the ranching community to look at those conservation easements. Working lands easements in our context also refer to timber. And so we do conservation easements on forested land that has active timber harvesting on it, and those conservation easements protect those large timber grounds and keep them intact and prevent them from being developed. So it doesn't just mean farming and ranching, it means timber too, and in lots of other places it shows up lots of other ways. So that conservation easements is that umbrella term. Working lands easements is really how it shows up here for us in Central Oregon.
And would those timberlands be working?
They're working. Yep.
Of course. Yeah. Okay. I guess one of the things in the big scheme of things, when you're looking at a watershed or whatever, and there's various trusts, and is there a master plan?
That's a great question. There's really good mapping tools out there that sort of show where, whether they're from ODFW, whether they're from the Nature Conservancy, whether, they're from other parts. There's really great mapping tools that sort of show where high priority areas are. The Land Trust community, there's lots of us here doing this work in different ways. And so for us, I talked about how we determine goals around conservation. We work hand in hand here with the Oregon Agricultural Trust, who you probably all met and heard from over the years. They are also a land trust, but they protect specifically for those agricultural values. And so we're really all looking at where our specific strategy fits on the landscape. We do work pretty closely together, and we generally tend to identify priority areas over time. So you can see on the map when we look at White Creek, that was obviously a priority area for our land trust and for local partners for a number of years, and that's why you see so much conservation happen there. And so once it's starting to, we've started to hit maybe a critical point where we've done most of what we can do there. We're also, as I mentioned, sort of spreading out and looking at where are these really critical places where we can do this work, and what are the criteria we'll use to describe them. So I wouldn't say there's a master plan for the basin, but I will say that we are periodically updating and creating focus areas and bringing partners together around those focus areas. And the Upper Crooked is one of those, which is why we're talking about it a bunch today.
I got a comment. My name's Chad Allen, and I dairy in Tillamook, and I was part of the original group of Oregon Ag Heritage Commission that met in Prineville for multiple
Thank you for your service.
meetings to put all that stuff together. And I just recently worked here last year with OAT because I had questions around what opportunities would agricultural properties on the coastal side be in participating in that, in working lands easements, because the development in those coastal ag properties are really challenging because they have all these overlaying hazard zone areas, whether it's flooding predominantly, but tsunami and other issues. And that what exactly developmental rights do you even have? Because it's even challenging to even develop your building, your farm structures within flood zones and floodways. It's quite restrictive, and so I always question, well, there's probably not those the developmental rights that you would see, say, on these large ranches, right? We're talking about smaller, 100 acres, 200 acre type of properties, and what would that look like? And so we went through an appraisal process and engaged in sort of a pulling out what those might be, right? And it was interesting because what ultimately end up being in terms of coming up with some cash value of what that working land easement would be really wasn't targeting any of those developmental rights. It was more around sort of selling this easement of Oregon Ag Trust being part of any future sale of that property, and that here would be all the criteria that the next person would have to meet, right? 10 years in an ag enterprise business, credit checks, they want to make sure that if somebody else purchases that property, they have a track record of being successful in agriculture, not specifically dairy, but whatever that is, and so that they were at least part of that yes or no, right? And they had to agree with whatever that next purchaser was, and that was sort of where whatever the number came up for a value that you would receive in that easement was sort of from that, because these other parts were hard to pull out, because on the coast, ag lands don't have that same fragmentation and a lot of housing being built in those low-level lands, because they have these other hazardous zone areas that are inhibitive anyways.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is, the reason why these are very customizable, and they're not necessarily a fit for every farmer or rancher, depending on where they are. Here in Central Oregon, generally our easements, the valuation of them, and it fluctuates depending on a lot of factors, is around 30% of of the total value of the land is the expected payout. But there are states that have, for example, much looser land use laws and easier development processes. I was just in Florida talking to somebody who worked at a land trust where the cost of those easements, are 60, 70% of the land value, because you have all this, you have a very easy path to development if that land were to sell. And so they really do have to be customizable for that reason. They look different everywhere that you work. And it's great, I think, to have Oregon Agricultural Trust at the state level really being an advocate for looking at not just from our region, what does it look like, but what does it look like for the state, and how do these programs really serve all Oregonians? But it's a great question. Other questions, or should we move on to habitat mitigation? So the Land Trust and many other partners in the state, as renewable energy and particularly solar development in the state of Oregon is expanding significantly over the last 10 years, has become more and more involved in the process of mitigating those solar developments. So you don't have to read this whole thing, but essentially the ODFW has a fish and wildlife habitat mitigation policy that requires that developers who are proposing new developments for example, solar developments, are required to mitigate the impacts of those developments to fish and wildlife habitat. So as part of their permitting process, they're required to demonstrate how they will do that. And there's a very complicated behind the scenes process to determine what their mitigation requirement is, and that depends on where are you siting your solar project, what type of habitat is there, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really more of ODFW's role. And I'm talking today more about the Land Trust's role. So when you are proposing, we'll just use solar as an example, because that's really mostly what we're dealing with here in Central Oregon. When you're proposing a solar project to a county for permitting, you're required to demonstrate how you are going to meet your ODFW mitigation requirements. There's essentially three ways to do that. One, you can self-mitigate, which means if ODFW says you need to mitigate by conserving this much habitat in this type of habitat, you could go out and buy a property or use a property you already own at that acreage level and that habitat type and restore it yourself as the developer. And some developers do that. I will say that I was on a recent tour where they were talking about a U.S. Fish and Wildlife study that showed the success rate of self-mitigation across the country. It's woefully low. There are good developers out there that are really doing good self-mitigation, but I think the percentage I heard was about 40% of these self-mitigation projects fail to meet the standards over the term. And these mitigation efforts, they have to happen over the life of the project. So the average solar array, right, is about the project has a 40-year lifespan. And so over the course of that 40 years, about 40% of self-mitigation projects were failing, according to this study. The other way to do mitigation is payment in lieu, which is essentially you pay an organization, usually a nonprofit, oftentimes, or a quasi-government organization. So land trusts are a good example. SWCDs are another good example of people that are doing payment in lieu solar mitigation. Our partners at Cook County SWCD, they're very active in this space as well, and we are often partnering and kind of sharing ideas on how to move these projects forward. The third option for mitigators is to purchase credits from mitigation banks. So essentially mitigation banks are pre-established. They are doing conservation and restoration on large properties. It generates credits that developers can buy and doesn't really require any negotiation from the developer. It's essentially sort of the easy button. Also, for that reason, probably the most costly option, but really high quality restoration happening. I just want to acknowledge that when I started with the Land Trust, and I think for many of us who are in the field, mitigation, particularly this type of mitigation, is really new to a lot of us, and there's a lot of learning that's been happening over the last 5 years, and I still have a lot of learning left to do. So if any of you are spacing out or this is not landing, just know I was in your seat about 5 years ago, and it's taken quite a while to really wrap my head around all this. I think it took about 10 times of me listening to these types of presentations. But I can give an example of how it's showing up here, and maybe this will help sort of bring some clarity. When we talk about payment in lieu, the Land Trust participated in the payment in lieu mitigation partnership for our Pride A Ranch property that you saw on an earlier slide. That's just outside of Willowdale. The project we were mitigating was the Bake Oven Solar Project. It was a large solar array that went in just outside of Maupin. And their mitigation requirement that they received from ODFW was 694 acres. It was a 40-year obligation. That was the life of the solar project. And it required the land trust as the recipient of the payment in lieu to maintain and enhance habitat across that 1,694 acres and do annual monitoring and reporting to ODFW on how that was going. And so you can see that results in really high integrity mitigation, right? You're providing annual monitoring and reporting. You're working with a reputable organization who does habitat restoration and enhancement across our whole service area. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but there is a calculation for sort of how much that payment in lieu costs, which is outlined on this slide. We could spend an entire 60 minutes just talking about that, so we're going to keep moving. But if you have questions for me later, feel free and I can parse some of that out for you. And so that project provided significant funding to the Land Trust to do that habitat enhancement and maintenance and monitoring and reporting, which was a great benefit to the Land Trust because it provided stewardship funds for a project that was really already very important to us and also helped the solar project move forward. And so it was sort of a win-win for the county where the project was being sited, for the Land Trust, and for the folks in the state who are trying to pursue those renewable energy goals. The Land Trust also participates in mitigation banks. And so when I was talking earlier about mitigation banks, part of the construction of those mitigation banks also requires their ability to demonstrate sort of the durability, their own durability, how long they're going to last. Does anyone want to take a guess of how you can guarantee they're going to last for a long time? It's on the slide, a conservation easement, which are in perpetuity. And so the Land Trust will typically hold conservation easements over these mitigation banks to ensure that midway through somebody's development, the bank doesn't decide, you know what, we're just going to split this up and turn it into a subdivision, right? So that really ensures that bank is there for the life of whatever project they're selling credits to. So the Land Trust is working on a mitigation bank in the Upper Crooked. I mentioned Keystone Ranch earlier on that. Do I have? No, I don't have that map. It's too many slides backwards. But it's in that Upper Crooked area, and it's part of that big connected landscape that we were looking at where we already have conservation easements. And so for us, it's already a priority area. We did very similar habitat mapping to what we would do for a conservation easement. And then we are in the process of negotiating. This is a donated easement, fully donated. And so there's no cash payment to the landowner. The easement is donated, it's tax deductible, and then it allows them basically to move forward and start selling these credits to developers. This is a really big win, not only for the Land Trust, which we have the opportunity then to keep this big acreage intact, which helps with that overall protected lands connectivity. It's also a win for the landowner there who has an interest in that type of restoration, particularly for elk and deer habitat on his property, but he's also able to keep his cattle operation moving along in an excluded area of the easement. So we don't have an easement over where he's running cows. We have an easement in the upper parts of the property where he wasn't grazing anyway. And so he's able to monetize this part of his property where he wasn't really using it for agriculture. He was going to restore it anyway because he cares about the land and the wildlife that lived there. And so for him, it was also a win-win. And so why do these mitigation projects matter for communities? I mentioned earlier it's opportunities for landowners to monetize conservation efforts while keeping their working lands working, and we're seeing this happen across the state. It ensures that renewable energy and economic development goals aren't undermining fish and wildlife conservation goals. And it also provides a simplified process for counties to ensure that projects are effectively mitigated. Because really for all of this is sometimes it's the scale that it's happening now is relatively new territory for lots of us across the state. And for many small counties, you know, they're not going to have the in-house expertise to know how good is good mitigation, right? And so particularly payments in lieu and mitigation banks really ensure that the mitigation that the county is approving is high quality mitigation and is really meeting those state requirements, but also moving forward renewable energy and economic development goals for the county. And so the Land Trust is playing an active role in lots of these conversations, and Land Trust, not just our Land Trust, but Land Trust across the state. It's exciting for us because it's a new source of funding for our work, our conservation and stewardship work, and it's also helping communities in the state move ahead. Lots of really important goals. So we're glad to be a part of it, albeit we are still on a steep learning curve and there's lots more to sort out. So I will stop there and open it up for questions.
Right. Director Cleaver?
What are the teeth when the self-mitigation process fails?
So ODFW is sort of the enforcing agent on, mitigation requirements. And so just like us, the Land Trust, people who are self-mitigating are needing to provide those annual reports and updates on meeting those requirements of the mitigation. So those are the teeth. I would say I couldn't really speak to how sharp they are. In Oregon in particular, or really nationwide, I think as this evolves, there's more to be done. And I think ODFW, as these solar projects are ramping up, they've been ramping up their capacity and figuring out their mitigation program and how it's going to be operated. And so we're sort of in a state of transition now. But the hope is that in addition to creating really positive pathways for land conservation organizations like SWCDs and land trusts and for mitigation banks to guarantee quality mitigation, they're also creating those mechanisms to enforce when mitigation isn't really meeting its requirements. So it's not a great answer to your question, but that's the enforcer.
Right. Any other questions? This has been fascinating. How does the nexus, let's say Oregon, maybe compared to other states, in light of our land use laws that are so strong? I think Vermont may be stronger than ours if you look at, restrictions for development. How does that mesh with your priorities or the opportunity or lack of opportunity?
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to say earlier, and I'll say now, is that the Land Trust, when we talk about those community values pieces, we're really looking community by community in Central Oregon. So the way that we are doing work in Sisters looks very different than the way that we're doing work in Prineville, for example. And that really comes down to those partnerships, right? Of what does that community really care about? What's most important to them? And which of those values overlaps with the Land Trust conservation goals. And so, for example, like in Crook County, you're going to see us doing a lot more conservation easements than fee title acquisitions because the message from the community has been we want to keep working lands working. We care about fish and wildlife, but we also care about the agricultural economic viability of this community, the heritage of this community, and we want to see that kept intact, and we can help do that and advance fish and wildlife goals at the same time. And so that's really how we're making those decisions. And then, the land use piece, I think, again, I just was in Florida talking to some land use colleagues, and it's just a whole different ball of wax out there. It's much more expensive to do conservation out there. There's the urgency is very high. I think in some ways here, we have the ability to work at a slightly slower pace because while development threats certainly exist, I mean, we're seeing it happen over time across the state, right? They're there, but it's certainly not happening necessarily at breakneck speeds, and that's largely because of our land use system. And so I think we'd be naive to think that our land use system is going to prevent development and conversion of agricultural lands in perpetuity. We know that's not true because we've seen that not be true. But we also know that we've got time to kind of plan things out and move ahead. But we would like to move faster, and that's really just funding. And so the more the state can make investments, particularly in the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, it would make a huge difference in our ability to do these projects. We've got the state, I think the number is about, we've got 17 million in projects that are funded through ASAP-AL. Don't quote me on that number because it's coming off the top of my head, which is, it's past 5 o'clock, so dicey at best. But there is I think OAHP this year was funded at 2 million. And in order to match those projects, right, you'd need 17 million. So you've got all these projects that you could execute relatively shortly if you just had the matching dollars. And so it's an exciting opportunity because you have so many willing landowners, but it's also a challenge because landowners come to us in times of need often when they are facing hardship or future hardship and are looking at how do I change my operation? How do I infuse some cash into my operation? And sometimes we're telling them, it's a 10-year process because of funding, not because of capacity of staff or, project readiness. It's really the funding piece that slows it down.
Yeah. How much money is flowing from USDA now total? You talked about 17 million, but that's for Oregon?
Yeah, and I don't know the nationwide number, but I can follow up with you, Ellen, and I can figure that out and send it to you just so you can do a comparison. There's been a whole working group, and just a plug for anybody who wants to serve on the OWEB board. This is a big role that OWEB has been playing is around the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, so there is a direct tie if you want to help move these projects forward. That's a great place to do it. There's been a great group working on not only describing the need in Oregon, but describing the success of other states and leveraging those federal dollars and Oregon's sort of missed opportunity and not being able to bring those home.
Yeah, I'll just say I lobbied heavily Senator Roberts, and we got the first $1 million in the Farm Bill quite a few years ago for this. So, I'd like to really know what the number is now. So
it's a big number, and this is a program that NRCS has really invested in seeing grow. And again, you have so many landowners that are seeing the value of these conservation easements to help them advance their goals. And we want to help them here in the state of Oregon. And we have lots of land trusts who are standing by with great projects. So the nice thing is we do all of this conservation work in perpetuity. So we will still be here when the money eventually shows up.
Yes, Director Norris?
Thank you. First, thank you for speaking. This was wonderful, fascinating information that I didn't realize I knew so little about, so thank you. I think I know the answer to this question because of the timeline it takes to get approved for these, but do you ever work with people looking to buy like a ranch or working land, like to help them bring the cost down for them to go in for becoming a farmer or a rancher?
Deschutes Land Trust generally doesn't, but our partners at Oregon Agricultural Trust, as Chad was mentioning, are really sort of looking at not only conservation easements as a part of their toolkit, but also sort of how are we bringing along the next generation of farmers and ranchers? How are we getting them into affordable operations? And that's a mix of finding operations that are eased, that are more affordable to buy, and they're the ones that are really making those connections across the state. And here too, locally in Central Oregon, you'll find them showing up in lots of different places. And so generally, if we find folks who that's what they're looking for, we'll generally sort of hand them over to the experts at OAT who are working hard on that stuff every day.
Okay. Great. Anything else? Well, thank you. It ended on a very high note, so appreciate you joining us, and I think we all learned a lot. So thanks. And for the board, we are adjourning until tomorrow morning at 8. We're back here. We're going to be meeting with the state FFA officers for just a little mix and mingle, and then we'll kick off at 8:30. We do have dinner is back. Remember, so dinner, sir. But Reba, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. Adjourn.
Dinner.
Dinner.
The director is on spring break, and normally this would be for